American Jews who are seen as in this very comfortable reality in this little bubble. They care deeply about Israel and have always been part of those who are building Israel, whether it's from afar, with visits, with political involvement, with money, or with making Aliyah. That's always been a part of Israel. So I think the fact that I was there and other Olim like me, I think that's very important for these other young 18-year-olds who come to the army. Everyone changes in some way. So I was learning about Israeli society. Maybe they were learning more about the Jewish people in general.
Welcome to JLM Unplugged, a podcast about Olim for Olim. I am Gabi Danieli.
And I'm Michal Cohn. We are Aliyah coordinators for the Jerusalem Municipality. We are here to assist and navigate Olim in their Aliyah journey from the initial planning to the final landing and beyond.
Join us as we bring you life stories, experiences, and special guests that you know and love here from our capital city. JLM Unplugged. A diplomatic correspondent for the Time of Israel, an IDF captain in the reserve units. Welcome. Such a pleasure and an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about where you're from, when you got to Israel, a little background about your Aliyah story?
Sure. Happy to, and thanks for having me. This is exciting. I'm originally from the Boston area. I was born actually in Providence, Rhode Island, and my family is still there, so I'm the only one of my family that made Aliyah. Grew up modern Orthodox, grew up in modern Orthodox education, and I decided to make Aliyah initially actually to join the army.
Wow.
I was trying to think, you get to that, when you leave your house, you try to think about what will be a meaningful step, what will be something that will challenge me, what will be something that can set me up well in the future. And I thought the military would be a good option. I was actually trying to decide between the U.S. military and the IDF, and I thought it'd be easier and kind of more meaningful, more useful even to be in Israel, especially as an Orthodox Jew. I made Aliyah. I did Ulpan at Kibbutz Ma'agan Michael. Have you been there? It's north of Caesarea, north of Caesarea.
That's the first I've heard of that.
It's the best beach in Israel. So if you're ever looking for a beach
I've
to go
heard
to,
of Caesarea. I would hope.
Ma'agan Michael it's a kibbutz that's on the water, has its own beach that is open to the public by law. All beaches in Israel have to be, and it has a few islands off the beach. Absolutely stunning, very much recommended, and they also have a very good Ulpan. So I did the Ulpan, then I started to focus on, where am I going to get into the army? And I ended up getting into Givati, which is one of the 5 infantry brigades.
That's the purple kumta.
The purple kumta.
Beret.
Yeah, the purple beret. They belong to the Southern Command, so they do most of their operational stuff in the Gaza Strip. They're there right now in the northern Gaza Strip, in the Jabalia area, and historically, they're most identified with the Gaza Strip. I became an officer after 2 years of service, and my first posting as an officer was in a unit called Gadsar HaBedui, which is I was the only Jew in the company.
Wow.
It's almost all Bedouins or other Israeli Arabs, mostly Muslims, a few Christians. That was something I requested. I thought it was very meaningful to be part of that since they're all volunteers, and it's something that I want to encourage. And then I went back to Givati as an officer, and then I finished my active service. And I went to school, studied, started working, and I'm still a reservist in the IDF today.
Wow. Why did you choose Dafka, specifically mid-Israel Galilee area for Ulpan, and not like Jerusalem
I see what you're saying.
Tel Aviv, the classic route?
I think, interesting that you say classic route, because I think at that time I was trying to do what everyone else was not doing. So a lot of my friends were going to yeshiva in Israel or going to college. And I thought, let me do something unique. Let me go to the army. And I wanted to really focus on getting my Hebrew up, the day school education for Hebrew, even though from pre-K to senior year, I learned Hebrew every day of my life and was pretty much unable to functionally speak.
This is what you did independently? Like you yourself wanted to learn Hebrew?
No, I'm saying just in school, right?
School.
Yeah,
wow.
I started learning the English, how to read English when I started learning Hebrew. Yeah. And then you think, to 12th grade, and then you get out of it, and usually most of the students cannot actually speak. So I really wanted to get my Hebrew up. Obviously, the best way to really learn Hebrew is in the army itself. That's where you just have no choice, and you really learn spoken Hebrew. But I wanted to kind of be focused on just learning Hebrew, working out, a little bit of time at the beach, and that was my focus.
A nice relaxed environment for your Hebrew learning.
Exactly.
So how was that shift? Ulpan. Well, let's start. Providence.
Yeah.
Ulpan in New York is Caesarea, and then straight to the army?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a couple months to figure out, and you do like gibushim, you do some tests to try to figure out where you're going to end up in the army. But it was a very exciting time. I think I found it's rare in your life when you know you're about to do something big and important and meaningful, something that will change you, hopefully in positive ways. And you know you're focused on that, and you can wake up and prepare for that. I found it's hard to get back to that place. And I tell young people when they're about to go to the army, even if they're in the army, you'll look back at this fondly because you'll know that you are spending most of your day, how much do they sleep? I don't know, 5 hours, sometimes no hours, doing something that you know is big. It's hard, but it's something important, and you don't always find that in the professional world. So it was a very exciting time, a very meaningful time, and it's certainly a feeling that I've tried to find in other things that I've done in my life.
Right. And the culture shock. Because you didn't go straight to, I assume, in Givati, but then you went to this mixed unit.
Yes.
So it's not only religious differences, for sure, it's a cultural differences going on.
There's no question. Well, first of all, there was cultural differences just in Givati, in the army in general.
Okay.
I'm coming from kind of an American mindset, American Jewish mindset. You get there, and I think the expectation is because when you've grown up and you respected Israel and you're a Zionist and you're thinking about the IDF, you kind of expect everyone to come with the same energy that you do. I'm finally joining the army, right? Yeah. As we know, for some Israelis, that's very much the case. They go to these mechinot, these pre-army programs. Mm-hmm. But some of them, they have kind of this, any draft army is going to happen. They have, they do it and they do it well, but they like to complain about it, or they like to sit on the side and smoke and make jokes. So that was certainly something that I had to get used to.
Okay. Right. Don't they say it's called like shachor, right?
Yeah. So they definitely called me tzahov.
Yeah.
Okay. Right? Because
tzahov is when you're like obsessed with your service and you're so excited,
and you just try to be good. I knew I was on my way to command, and I wanted to be an officer. And my approach was, this is not a joke. We can have fun, we can bond, but this is not a joke. This is serious. If we train properly and we learn properly, we're more likely to win, first of all. We're more likely to not have accidents, and we're more likely to all come home healthy and in one piece. That was my approach. There were certainly people in the same mindset, but there was also people that wasn't. When they say that it's truly all of Israeli society, it really is. Yeah. So there's people I never would have interacted with from all sorts of places I'd never heard of, places I'd heard of but I would never go, just because you just don't have an opportunity to. Right. So I think that was really important as well. And also, once you're an officer, that's the big switch, where I'm the one who is instilling this education and Zionism in soldiers that have grown up here. From a number of backgrounds, a lot of Russian-speaking Olim, or at least their families were. From an Ethiopian background, there was a lot of that as well. All sorts of backgrounds in Israeli society. But certainly, an even bigger culture shock, of course, was a Bedouin unit, where you start to see some of the intricacies of the Bedouin society, which we usually see from, anyone that even tries to have some sort of interaction, and I encourage people to. It's kind of, we see it as one thing. There's Bedouins, there's some in the south, there's some in the north. Right. Some of them serve in the army, but that's about all we know. We know that there's a lot of problems about housing and
land area.
The land use, and a lot of complex issues. But then you see interactions between the northern and the southern Bedouin, which has their own dynamics and their own tensions between different tribes and different families, and then between the Bedouins in general and the Arabs that are not Bedouins, and then between all of those who are Muslims and with the Christian Arabs in the unit. Fascinating things, and it was like they're all focused on those dynamics, and I was kind of seen as the neutral referee, the fair outsider. So that was very interesting for me.
Sorry. So many questions. Would you say that because your unit was so diverse and it wasn't just, your classic Israeli that you can imagine in your head, that it kind of made you feel like, even though you are an Ole from America, that you are in a unit where everyone is coming with their own differences? Or did you feel like an Ole? Because that's really a question that we ask a lot of soldiers. Yeah. Because you're coming into an environment that is not American in the slightest bit. Most soldiers will have Americans around them, and you didn't. So even more so. So kind of what was it like for you to be an Ole Chadash from America, totally different culture, different language, and being in a unit where there's not even any other Americans?
You're talking about in Givati or the Bedouin unit?
Both.
So in Givati, there was a few Americans here and there, but it certainly wasn't heavily American. I think in units like Nachal and Tzanchanim, the paratroopers, you'll get more Americans. There were certainly a lot of Olim, but they, like I said, tended to be from Ethiopia or the former Soviet Union. It felt like I was one of the mix. It was such a mix of people that there's just different characters, and it's kind of this. I don't know how I would describe it, but there was like very few just standard Israelis.
Yeah,
it seemed like there was a lot of people coming from these unique backgrounds.
Did you feel like you were representing America? Or did you kind of put that on the side and you didn't want it to be the focus?
There was no question that people saw me as American.
Okay.
Right? And in terms of the jokes we made and things like, and my Hebrew wasn't perfect and
accent.
accented and all that. Yeah. It was certainly something that people talked about.
Yeah.
And never in a nasty way, ever. It was something that was kind of funny and enjoyable. One of the commanders in a parallel platoon was also, I think his parents were American. He would try to hide that from me because, in basic training, you're supposed to have this distance. But I could tell, and you could tell that, he would like pay special attention to me. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, discussions about why would someone make Aliyah from America? Why am I there in the mud and the sand and the sweat with them? I think that maybe opened their eyes to this reality that, that American Jews who are seen as in this very comfortable reality in this little bubble. They care deeply about Israel and have always been part of those who are building Israel, whether it's from afar, with visits, with political involvement, with money, or with making Aliyah. That's always been a part of Israel. So I think the fact that I was there and other Olim like me, I think that's very important for these other young 18-year-olds who come to the army. Everyone changes in some way. So I was learning about Israeli society. Maybe they were learning more about the Jewish people in general.
Right.
And now, did your unit, because you were in a mix even with the Christian Arabs, did that influence your decision what to study post-army?
Interesting. So I did.
So just for people to know, where did you study and what did you study?
So I studied at Georgetown. I studied national security.
Okay.
I think my Army service definitely put me in that direction. It's kind of the continuation because some people just do their service and they focus on their assignment, but I was kind of thinking about the bigger pictures. Why are our borders like this? Why are our enemies like this? What does victory mean? All those things. So
did you always feel that, like that need to understand the Israeli society, the security around us, the ability of the state to protect itself?
Yeah, it's always been stuff. I've always liked history.
Since a young kid, I'm saying.
Yeah, I've always studied history, geography, war, those type of things.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Because usually Israelis don't, when they join the army, it's like, okay, an obligation, like you said.
Right.
And they don't think about the macro picture, like internationally, like as some American or North Americans volunteer. And then later on take it to like a career path.
Yeah.
For example, the Prime Minister himself studied outside and then came back.
Right. So it's definitely for me to try to contextualize some of the things that I saw and to see how they fit into the bigger picture. But I found that people in D.C. were very interested. The minute I said I was in the IDF, I had been in the IDF, they were very interested in hearing my insights. So, I was kind of, I came in almost, I would say, with a lack of self-confidence coming into D.C. because I'm saying, okay, all these American soldiers or former CIA or current CIA, they're going to do their degree, and they have this knowledge about Iraq and Afghanistan, all these places I hadn't yet been. I haven't been to Afghanistan. I did end up in Iraq, and then they're asking me about. You see the respect they give to Israel, first of all, but also they're asking me about, what it's like to be a combat soldier there, what's it like in this situation, what's Gaza, what's going on in all these places. That was very interesting as well. And that's when I started to write and to publish a little bit. And I actually saw that, the most important thing to do is just get your thoughts out there because you never know what kind of legs an article would have. So I wrote one article about this Bedouin unit. And I made a claim, and I would write it differently now, now that I understand a bit more, but that the way the Army and Israeli society in general gets this Bedouin unit wrong in terms they don't understand some of the nuances because they haven't been in it like I was for a time, not that I'm a real expert. That's the way the West gets the Middle East wrong.
Oh, wow.
So that was like...
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure.
Why?
All right, so I'll tell you a story. So after basic training... So I was an officer, so I took the soldiers through basic training, and then the soldiers were on what's called the Regila. They were off for a week, and the staff came to this IDF seminar where they have these consultants, outside consultants, come in and and kind of talk to us about what went wrong in basic training and what we should do for the future. And there were a lot of things that were not good enough. And I found that throughout the discussion, the other commanders were even if they weren't telling the truth really, they were just kind of protecting their own status and reputation. And I was coming from, a Western environment, and I was being very self-critical. I was sharing, this is what I did wrong, this is what I need to do better with the soldiers. And then everyone else would be like, oh yeah, that's the reason. Right? If someone's saying you did wrong, all right, let's just use that. And then these outside Jewish consultants were like, oh, so I guess Lazar's the problem with this whole thing. And it was just because I was the only one who was willing to be self-critical, right? And it just, and after I took the consultant aside, I said, you're just not getting the dynamics here. And they couldn't grasp it. And so then I said, so I think this lack, even within this tiny, microcosm, I think this says a lot about how in the West they don't understand some of the dynamics in the region that maybe we don't understand perfectly as Israelis, but we certainly, I think, do it better than, let's say, some Europeans that like to shake their fingers at us. Right. So, I thought it was an interesting article. And then I was in a bar in D.C., and with a fellow classmate who had been an officer in the U.S. Army, and he had a fellow officer who had just gotten back from Iraq, and we were talking. And he told me that, I said I was in the IDF, and he said, I just read this article by an IDF officer who was in a Bedouin unit, and it was talking about the Middle East. And I thought my friend had told him to just pull my leg. Right. But he wasn't. It was on the required reading list of all incoming officers into Iraq.
Wow.
Because they wanted to help Westerners understand how to approach different, especially Middle Eastern
mentalities. It really goes back to what you said about, when you write, you don't know where it's going to end up, and really understand that there can be huge importance to what you write.
Yeah, there's no other way to get your thoughts and let other people chew on it, even critique and share it. So that's one that kind of clicked for me. You got to start writing. And that was before I even thought about being a journalist, but I tried to write when I could, whether it was in school or professionally. If you have insights, absolutely learn how to write, learn how to get thoughts written in a way that is coherent and digestible. And there's so many platforms these days, especially online. Everyone's looking for new quality content.
Right.
That you don't want to say make money with it, but it's great for reputation. It's great to share your ideas. Right. It's great to get feedback on them. It's something I tell people.
You write about the war? What do you write about?
Now or before as a journalist?
Now.
So now as a diplomatic correspondent. So I started almost 4 years ago. So I'm not really a veteran journalist. There's people who have been doing it 15, 20 years. Right. I started it was still Corona in Israel, so it was still a weird time.
Yeah.
But the focus was on the Abraham Accords because they were very new.
Okay. So
it was still in the early months after the Abraham Accords. So that was really the big question in terms of Israel's diplomacy. What does it mean? How are we going to develop relationships with the UAE, with Bahrain and Morocco? And the big question hovering around was, when does the inevitable peace with Saudi Arabia happen?
Right.
It was seen as inevitable. Right. Now, in that time, there was political turmoil here. Bibi left. The Bennett-Lapid government came in for a year and a half, and it was a lot of flying around with Bennett and Lapid to the different Abraham Accords countries, to the U.S., and then the big thing that happened in 2022 was the Ukraine-Russia war, which I went to Ukraine 4 times to cover that war, which was a very, very meaningful experience. Very different than kind of covering the Israeli environment, because with Israel, when you fly, let's say with the prime minister, it's kind of very predictable and very scheduled, right? You get on Bibi's plane, you fly with him, you have a briefing with him. There's a few highlights, whether it's a speech to Congress, whether a meeting with Biden in the Oval Office, and you try to talk to advisors, get some behind-the-scenes scoops. Maybe talk to a few people in the U.S., but it's kind of all the same, and pretty similar stories come out from the different Israeli networks, whether it's Times of Israel, Channel 12.
And your role is to just come and cover the footage and what's being said?
So the best thing that I can do, which I try very hard to do, is to get inside information, right? So let's say Netanyahu's office will put out statements and videos, or we're actually there at the event and we can record it and write down ourselves. But you want to get those side conversations with advisors, maybe with the prime minister himself, but Netanyahu is much more cagey about this, and try to say, okay, did this come up in the meeting with Biden's people? What is their approach to this? Is this still a point of tension between you, or is there agreement? And you have to develop those personal relationships. And sometimes you actually have to find people who are not the decision makers, but people kind of on the side. So a fun one I did was, I don't know if you remember the Negev summit during Lapid's tenure as foreign minister. He brought the foreign ministers of the Abraham Accords countries and Tony Blinken and the Egyptian foreign minister to the Negev, which was seen as a watershed because they're coming to something called the Negev Summit in Israel, and they're doing it openly, and they were in this like resort near Stable Care. So trying to get information there was the regular work, but then everyone left, and I was still hanging around for a while, and I was like, there's waiters who have been walking in and out of meetings and who have just been involved with preparation. So I started talking to the waiters. I talked to the chef. So they gave me interesting information about how the food worked and how the food had to be checked.
You read about it.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. How the food had to be tested, and the Secret Service had to see everything, and they had to throw out all this food because they made it before the Secret Service got there and Blinken was eating. But then you try to pick up on snippets of information as well, right? Did you hear about this? So trying to be creative in that way, and because our job as journalists is to make sure the public has the truth, whatever the truth means, but as much information as possible so they can make proper decisions on what they want to, how they want to act in this democracy. Right now, every politician is going to give a certain version of events that serve them. Let's be honest. Doesn't matter if it's in Israel, the U.S., any democracy. They're not going to give the whole truth. So your job is to let the public be educated voters so that they can make educated decisions and they can decide who they want to lead them and who they want in or out of office.
Let me ask you, how do you keep your own personal opinions and political views outside of your writing?
Great question. I think, first of all, in journalism...
Especially here in Israel, where there's 5 different news channels, really?
And it depends how you want to count, but there's...
Let's say from I-24 to, I would say, 11.
Oh, so on TV,
On TV, and then news is like J-Post, obviously, Arutz Sheva, Times of Israel.
That's in English, but then you have Mariv, Yediot, Haaretz.
But you're the only one who I think is born in America, went through the yeshiva system, volunteered to the army, and yet served and went back to the States, came back here.
I don't know if I'm the only one.
I think you're the only one.
It could be.
So I'm saying, how do you keep your political views?
I think in general in journalism across the West, whether it's Israel, the U.S., Europe, journalists have become too activist and have seen themselves as they have a mission to push the public in a certain way because that certain direction is more virtuous
100%.
Or more moral than the other way. I think that is very problematic. The U.S. was better about not doing that until I think the first Trump administration. Then you saw some very respectable outlets being very partisan, which is a problem. Hopefully they're going back in the other direction now. In Israel, I think you have some outlets that are openly, whether they're on the left or right. Let's just say Haaretz, where they stand. They don't try to hide it at all. And Arutz Arbasri, the Channel 14, full out pro-Bibi, right? They don't try to hide it. They say, if the other side is going to be so openly against him, we can be openly for him. I don't think that's the right approach. I think recognizing what your job is and what role you play in democracy means you have to understand what your biases are and know that there is a way to cover everything. You have to ask yourself all the time, why am I covering this? If I get a piece of information or a quote from somebody, you have to talk to the other side and you have to talk to everyone involved in the story. Hopefully I'm doing it well. Let's say an interesting story I was just writing about was the Pope Francis and his relationship to Israel, especially since October 7th.
I saw that article.
Great. And it's a very complex topic, and I think more important than people realize. And I'm personally very critical. I like the relationship between Jewish community and the Catholic Church. I think it's important. I think it's very interesting. But I'm very critical of this Pope. And Catholic experts that I spoke to wrote to me after and said that I covered it in a fair way, in a nuanced way, and they were very, very happy with it. So I think that's a sign of success. That's obviously less charged than the current politics now. Thank God, as a diplomatic correspondent, I'm not in the Knesset reporting. So I'm not like reporting on the different parties, stabbing each other in the back, or whatever goes on in Parliament. But still, there is, I have to, even if I agree with one of Netanyahu's policies, my job at, say, a press conference is to challenge him and to challenge whoever I'm in front of.
You always have access to these people?
No.
It's one of those things where you need to fight for them to listen to your questions and answer them?
Yeah, so Netanyahu is famously reticent, to say it in the most positive, charitable way, to speak to media. Mm-hmm. When was the last time he did an on-the-record interview with Israeli press in Hebrew? It's been a long time, especially not with a friendly outlet like Channel 14. He's done a few press conferences, but the one he did less than 2 weeks ago, was the first in 3 months during a war. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty to talk about. Now,
does the press on Netanyahu to come out often?
Of course.
So my question is, like, for you, because you have all these inside ties, and like for all our viewers to know, you're pretty connected. I don't think you're going to reveal, the House of Cards secrets, but how do you get involved with these people? That's my question.
Okay. Right. So
I'm not going to reveal anything, but how do you get involved and then know the scoop that's really happening and then report it?
Sure.
Especially for Olim to know, because what they read is, I don't know, from religious magazines or, like said, even with Sheva, and they come with their own perspectives. Like, okay, and we got to be honest, like most North American Olim are pro-right. But how do you present, like, okay, this is what I know, and truthfully, this is coming from people that I know that are there.
Right. So there's a journalistic ethic, kind of a rule that you have to attribute what you know. So you say your sources. Now, in Israel, a lot of times it's from a diplomatic official, Gorem Medini. Sometimes that Gorem Medini is Bibi, especially if it says, I'll give you a general hint. Yeah. I won't say necessarily about Bibi, but if you know that a senior official is flying abroad and he's taking journalists with him, and everyone reports the same, Gorem Medini Bachir says, you can probably assume that it's that person who just doesn't want to be on record. Mm-hmm. Right? That's a decent assumption. I won't say it holds up all the time, but that often happens, that they will hide behind Gorem Medini. Now, we're not supposed to give them that ability to hide, to not own their own comments. And you're really supposed to be very careful when you grant someone anonymity. You're supposed to explain to the reader why. I gave him or her anonymity because their job could be in danger or their family could be in danger. But in Israel, since it's so accepted, that's just. Yeah, and I have to make sure that if I say it's an Israeli official who knows the actual topic. So if it's on the hostage talks, it's someone who knows the details of the hostage talks. It's not a random, Israeli official in, Misrad Pnim who has nothing to do with it. So that's number one. It's really a lot about personal relationships. So it's finding other, let's say, English speakers is a nice one. It's it's easier to make that connection. Sometimes it's people I knew before who then move into decision-making roles. That has happened as well. I think it's a little bit easier if you work for a Hebrew language news outlet, especially TV, because most decision makers will watch and consume Hebrew news, whether it's newspaper and TV. So they'll recognize and they'll think that Hebrew language news is where my voters are going.
Right. So, how does Times of Israel fit into that? How much influence?
It's a challenge. I think it's important to always stress to decision makers that there are hundreds of thousands of primarily English language speaking, whether they're Olim or children of Olim in Israel. That could be from the U.S., Canada, UK, South Africa,
especially
Australia.
Jerusalem, the number one Anglo-speaking city in all of Israel. And most, I would say close.
We have the numbers,
Yeah, we have the numbers, and not only that, majority of Anglo-speaking Olim from the whole world end up settling here in Jerusalem. So this is like the capital.
Oh, it's absolutely. I think it's not an organized political force because Anglo-Olim sometimes are left, right, center. Yeah. But it is definitely a constituency that you need to speak to, and I think, maybe Netanyahu might get it a little bit more because he has people like Ron Dermer around him, but you certainly see ministers who just don't get it, who will call people like us Olim Chadashim for the rest of our lives.
Right, yeah.
Okay, well.
Right? And they'll ask, sometimes, if it's someone who really doesn't follow this stuff, I'll say Times of Israel, and they'll say, is it New York Times? Is it New York Times? Oh, wow. And they'll be like, or they'll put me in a group with international press. And I'll be like, Times of Israel,
right.
So that's less and less. I think during the war, our profile has grown in Israel and abroad, and I think it's important that and I stress this too to people that I'm just meeting, that if you want to talk to foreign diplomats or foreign journalists, the first thing they do in the morning is open up Times of Israel. They check it all day.
Right.
So that is absolutely a way for Israel to get its story out to the world. Right. And it's important for them to realize that. I think the Army understands it more than maybe some other, like the Army spokespeople understand it more than some other offices do. But that's always going to be a challenge because, if someone's has grown up or they go home and they watch Channel 12 and they see the anchors there or the reporters there, and then they're on a flight with them, they have that advantage. Yeah. So I have to, I think, work twice as hard. I have to lean on every advantage I have. I think it's much easier with foreign diplomats, so ambassadors stationed in Israel. They will usually know who I am and even recognize my voice from the Times of Israel podcast before they meet me. Right. So that once they see you in that light, it's much easier to have those conversations.
I saw you recently on Fox News, and because we know what the world thinks of Israel in general, and especially different news broadcasting companies, what's the reaction that you get as an IDF reservist?
On Fox News?
On all different, because I saw you also on CNN as well, but do they treat you differently, or is it more of a, wow, we're in awe of you, like, thank you? Like you did, like they said in Georgia.
Well, which I don't think you're going to get right. You're not going to
get thank you. No, but you might. I don't know. What's his name? I don't know if you ever go on the Pierce.
No, I have Pierce not. I'm not sure I would either. But on Fox News, you definitely get a sense that they're not. Yeah, they're
respecting you.
They respect you. They respect Israel. They have a good, clear sense of good and evil, in the region, and. You get a sense the way they treat you. Now, let's say someone like the BBC, which has a pretty tough reputation here. Yeah. I think they're very professional in the way. I've never seen them ask a question which was crazy or change anything I said. I think a lot of times with international media, they just don't know that much. And you can see they have to, let's say an anchor on the BBC has to cover 1,000 different things. Right, so they have to ask a few basic questions. You can kind of predict it, and then you can take the conversation where you need to go. I appear on British radio a lot. I've found London Broadcasting Corporation, BBC Scotland, which are always good conversations. They're generally very professional. Once in a while, you'll get something adversarial, and I'll be like, all right, I'm gonna come back to that. Right. And then there's some regular radio shows, let's say on XM radio, that have me on regularly, and those are much more kind of supportive to Israel and sympathetic, and they're not there as a straight news organization. They're there because they have a certain position and they want to explore some issues with you as well. So I think that's an important part of the job, though, is to. I'm not a spokesman for Israel at all, but I think that when you give a fair shake to Israel and you're willing to be critical where you should be critical, I think in the end that puts Israel in a positive light, because I think ultimately we're doing, on balance, very positive things here. Yeah. And when you come in and are able to have an open conversation, honest conversation about Israel, hopefully people appreciate it. But I think then that is, my job is to get the real story out. And I think that that's an important way to do it.
So I kind of wanted to get to a bit more of a personal level with you.
Sure.
Did you think that you would end up in a position like this when you first made Aliyah, when you first were coming here? I mean, this is very different than what your average Olim is doing.
Yeah, thank God there's a lot of Olim in media. Mm-hmm. Times of Israel is mostly Olim, I would say, or English-speaking Israelis. We do have a Hebrew sister site too, which are mostly native-born, but there are, thank God, a lot of Olim, including in Hebrew media. There are some Olim that have done quite well. In terms of what I thought I would do, I probably pictured myself going into more like of the security services, whether it's Mossad, Shin Bet, maybe an army career, those type of things. I definitely did not think I would be a journalist. Like, I didn't really see how that was connected exactly to the things I was interested in. It just kind of happened that there was a job open. They wanted to talk to me.
Were you approached, or this was something that you sought out?
No, it was not something I sought out. I was working in an army position and a research position, so it was no longer a combat role. It was in an office in Glilot, kind of military strategy and what I had studied in school. And I was just there for too long, and there was nowhere to go up, and it was Corona. So all the interesting stuff, let's say with foreign militaries, like when the Americans come or the British come or you go there, that stuff had all dried up because of Corona. So I was starting to look around. I was looking at like cybersecurity, which is a hot field that everyone goes into. All sorts of stuff. And then a friend who was working at the Times of Israel said, we have this Knesset reporting job open. I don't know anything about the Knesset. I know as much as probably you guys know. Right. Just follow the news and, there's all this intrigue going on. But I don't know how the Knesset works. But I thought, wow, interesting growth opportunity. Let's figure it out. So I said yes.
And do you feel like this position kind of makes you more Israeli than what you were when you first came here?
Well, I didn't get that position, right? Because that was the Knesset, right? And then just nothing happened with it. And they ended up giving it to someone else who's a very experienced Israeli reporter, so fair enough. And then I started looking some more, and then I got called again that the longtime diplomatic correspondent at the Times of Israel had just had enough, I guess, of the high-paced, 24/6
movement,
and wanted, he was raising a family at this point, wanted something that was a little bit more predictable, so was moving into a different position, and they asked if I wanted, and this was exactly what I learned, right? Wow. Israel in the world, diplomacy, security. So I took that, and that's how I ended up there. And now I tell people that if you're interested in the big ideas, you're interested in these questions that hit the news, like let's say Syria, what's going to happen in the future of Syria, this gives you an opportunity to talk about it, to think about it, to share your ideas. And what's interesting about being a journalist is you can reasonably call anyone in the country, right? They might not answer you. Right. I could call Netanyahu. I could call Bennett.
Wow.
So people are going to wonder, how do you get that access?
Right. So they might not.
Yeah. They're not going to have it. Right. Just because he said that.
Now, it's perfectly reasonable that a diplomatic correspondent calls these people.
Yeah. Right.
That's our job.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, they'll
ignore you.
Yeah, they'll ignore you, or they'll say thank you or talk to my spokesperson.
Yeah.
Right. But it's reasonable to make the call to anybody.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And before you got this job, I know that you were teaching somewhere.
Oh, that
Security
was
studies.
No, that was okay. So I had
okay. So what's the story with that?
Yeah. So after Georgetown, I thought I was thinking, okay, I need a specific niche in this big security world. How about the Kurds? Now, the Kurds are back in the news today because there's Kurds in Syria and Israel. Gideon Sa'ar, our foreign minister, is talking about the importance of our support for the Kurds. So I thought this is a people who is very relevant to what happens in the Middle East. They're in Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. And they don't hate Israel at all. A lot of them really like Israel or see the Jews as an example of how a minority people can carve out a state for themselves in the Middle East. And I said, wow, why don't I become a Kurdish expert? So I started studying Kurdish while I was in school and then came back here. And from here, found a job. I was teaching English at a university in Kurdistan. Not because I care, but it was just some way to be there and get a little bit of money. And then I found a private tutor in Kurdistan, studied the Kurdish language, ended up working a little bit in the Kurdish government, their local government, and just traveled around the region. It's in northern Iraq, so it's part of Iraq. I never went to the southern part of Iraq, the Arab part of Iraq. That was a little bit too much for me. Yeah. But I went to the Iran-Iraq border in Kurdistan, saw Iranian soldiers.
Wow.
No, there were many Olim from Kurdistan. There's a whole neighborhood
in Jerusalem. They all came to,
They all came.
There's more than one.
Nakhla'o was built, the southern part of Nakhla'o was built by Kurdish Jews.
Absolutely. Wow. And you still find Aramaic speakers there. Katamonim.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
For sure. For all the synagogues there, you'll see.
I thought it was Persian more.
No, the Kurds.
Kurds.
You'll see from Zaho, from Dahuk, all these communities that came here.
Wow.
And you go into one of those synagogues, and I would recommend it. You'll see people over, let's say, 55 when they're talking to each other. You're like, what is that language? It's Aramaic. That was the Aramaic. The language of the Kurdish Jews. Now, they didn't pass it on to the next generation, sadly, but it's certainly still living, in those communities. And then you go to Mivaseret in the Kastel, right outside of Jerusalem, absolutely Kurdish Legamri.
Wow.
So I know that you're also involved in another organization, aside from your personal job, something called Babait.
Yes.
And what's that?
So Babait Jerusalem, it was initially, I think it was started in 2018. That was before I was involved with it. But the idea, Jerusalem was very different back then. It was, I think, in some ways people were less aware that there's young Olim coming that don't have families, and there weren't really these organizations in the synagogues, at least in the Baka Katamon area where a lot of us live. They were not attuned to the fact that there's a population here that kind of feels left out of communities, and we have to, or we should, cater to them in some ways. So recognizing that, there was a group of people that got together, got money from B'nai Akiva, and got a house, and they would live in the house and do events, usually shiurim, meals, things like that. I got involved during Corona when there were still people moving to Jerusalem, but then you didn't even have synagogue, and you didn't even have like parties anymore. Like, how are you going to meet people? So people were just eating alone on Friday nights, or they were moving back to America. So I was like, wow, what an opportunity we have here. This is like the only game in town all of a sudden. So we started to do outdoor minyanim for young professionals. And then it's kind of expanded. I saw that there was a lack of programs for people who are artistically inclined. So whether that's open mics, visual arts, I also do some art. So to organize those, to figure out where you can get funding for that, whether it's occasional minyanim. Everyone has the synagogues that they like, but it's nice to not have to fight for a seat in some of these shows. Or, there's the yeshiva and the seminary kids, and then there's family. So sometimes people just feel left out by the big communities, and they feel like no one says hi to me. So it's nice to have organizations that can get kind of Olim, young professionals. So that's what we're trying to do. You're
located where, in Baca, right?
We don't have a home, which is something that is a strategic goal for us to try to get a permanent space. I think that could do a wonderful thing. But right now, we move around. Most people live Baca Katamon area, maybe Rechavia, Talpiot. And let's say this weekend we're having a Friday night minyan. Might be at my house. If it's too rainy, we're going to have to find somewhere else. But that's always a struggle. And then we're going to have a nice Hanukkah event, which is going to be karaoke with a live band.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah,
awesome. So everyone wants a social event for Hanukkah.
Come check. We have a WhatsApp group, Facebook group, but I think those type of things are very important. And you see if people come, they want to be part of building a community. So it's important that people are willing to do this. And it's not going to come from the outside. It has to. I think most successfully it comes from the grassroots. That we cater to what people want, and we don't. We're not representing any any big organization somewhere. So I think that's very helpful and makes us being able to address what it is that people want.
I think it's so incredible that you have two different parts of your lives that are just so vastly different, in my opinion. And one is so macro and, thinking about Israel, from a point of, chutz la'aretz and what is our relationship with the outside world and how we represent ourselves and the information that we share and how we defend ourselves as a country. And then you're also looking internally and a little bit more of a micro level of, and what about the people who live here? What do they need? And how are we going to represent the young adult community in Jerusalem? So, it's amazing. You have, your foot in both places.
I never thought about that before. But, in Israel, especially in Jerusalem, kind of the micro and the micro and the macro are very connected. So there might be some little issue that seems very local or municipal, but it's this international issue, this big Jewish issue, this big diplomatic issue.
We've said on previous episodes that people look to Jerusalem as, the representative of Israel. We're not just, a random city, a random yeshuv. Jerusalem is very much aligned with Israel, and people use it interchangeably a lot, and there's a lot of an effect of what happens in Jerusalem and what happens in Israel. Yeah,
absolutely. And therefore, Jerusalem needs to practically be a place that is very welcoming and, let's say, easier in some ways. It's never going to be really easy, but it shouldn't be hard for someone to finish college or finish the army and decide, okay, I want to live in Jerusalem for all the magical reasons that we have in this city. And I'm going to have people who I can easily meet and be friends with, and I'll have a religious life and a social life. I think those things are important.
Strong infrastructure. It needs to know what it's doing, is kind of the way I would say it. And I think that there really are a lot of opportunities for Olim who are coming to Jerusalem, especially because, at any point in your life, you can move to any different part of the country. But when you start in Jerusalem, I think it has a huge effect because the endless opportunities we could talk about, till the end. But I kind of want to hear from you. Why did you choose Jerusalem?
Good question. So I think one day, I have a dream of living somewhere quieter, a little bit of land.
It's a city.
A little difficult.
Little grass in the backyard.
Yeah, which is difficult in Israel, but that's the dream. Who knows if it'll come true.
Yeah.
Why Jerusalem now? Listen, I have a lot of friends in Tel Aviv also, right? And they asked me the same thing. First of all, the weather here, I do not like the hot weather.
Yes. We're in the same boat as that.
Right. So winter in Jerusalem is perfect. It's like if you think of a beautiful fall day in the U.S. or Canada, that's what like winter days are here. You can like wear a jacket, not wear a jacket, go running,
here
go hiking.
Get a
that little bit crisp air.
Yeah, maybe always praying for a little bit of snow. I love it. It's absolutely. There's even a little foliage right now.
Yeah,
stunning. It's a beautiful city. I was walking around the old city last night. They have like the Jerusalem Santa guy started his thing, so all that is out.
That's amazing.
But you think about it, the city is absolutely stunning.
Right.
Absolutely beautiful, and you kind of forget it when you live here. But like if I flew to another city and it looked like this, I would be out of my mind. It's absolutely beautiful, and not only in the old city, throughout the city. Like it's got the hills, it's got nature right nearby. You have forest and desert really coming up right to the city.
Yeah.
And I like to go running, in the forest of Jerusalem on Fridays.
Oh, that's great.
And for someone that's interested in religion, history, diplomacy, different communities, it's all around. So it's really just a fascinating place and some place that, feel very alive in the right ways. And it does not feel like a big city to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have a car, and people are always like, "How do you park in Jerusalem?" Especially Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Right.
I've never had a problem parking.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe right outside the
Someone's
studio.
looking after you.
But like where I live, I just park right in front of my building. It's for free. It's so easy.
Yeah.
One advice that you would give young Olim professional adults who make that transition, let's say from the career worlds or from the university worlds, to get acclimated here in Jerusalem?
Good question.
What would you say to them? Like, hey, this is your home now.
Yeah.
How can they feel like super comfortable and make it socially, even like networking wise?
Right. So thank God there are organizations like Wabayit, and there's some other ones as well, and I'm sure the area programs as well can be helpful for that. So it's important to put yourself out there, even if some people socializing in big groups with a lot of strangers might stress them out. People go to the social events to meet people. That's ultimately what it is. I think it's important to work on your Hebrew.
Yeah.
You don't always want to feel like you don't understand what's going on around you, or it will always be a challenge. It'll always be a learning experience, but definitely investing in that, whether it's the initial opan and finding ways to have some part of your life that is conducted in Hebrew. It's easy to fall into the fully English language bubble. So I think that's very important as well. It's always a big stress or big question about professional advancement in Israel. It's there. There's certainly ways to do it in Jerusalem as well. A lot of people say, "Oh, Tel Aviv is where all the tech is." There's plenty going on in Jerusalem. You can just see from the construction going on. There's a lot of offices that are going to be going up. So I think it's absolutely possible. But again, it's easier if you have the Hebrew down. A lot of what happens in this country, and it's a challenge for Olim, is the personal connection. Since you didn't go to school, or if you didn't go to the army, you're missing some connections or that network to find ways to build that network. So if you're religious, it could be the synagogue communities, could be sports groups, it could be more arts and those type of things. But I think it's important to work on your network in Israel. If someone's actually looking for jobs, I tell them, find people who have done what you want to do and say, "I'd like to pick your brain. Can I buy you a coffee?"
Right.
If someone did that to me, what if someone who is young and enterprising is looking at me as like some expert and wants to hear me talk for a half hour? Of course I'm going to do it.
I've heard of that happening a lot, actually. It's happened to me. I've done it to other people. Yeah. I know people doing it to each other. I think there's something about this community that people really are open to sharing their experiences, opening people, coming into their community and their social network. People are just very caring and open here.
For me, if someone asked me can we sit and talk, I will absolutely help.
Yeah.
I've co-written articles with people to show them that process and to get their name out there. I'm always happy to. I've taken people on as interns that say they want, I'm looking for some internship.
That's great.
Yeah, so I think I'm required to do that because
you went through it.
People have certainly helped me. I have no magic, ability.
Yeah.
So I think just to be willing to ask that, and I think especially Olim who have been through it or are going through that same challenge and the same experience, I found are usually more than happy to be the one that tries to be the one that connects people.
I wanted to ask one more question, which I think is really important. That the people who are looking, watching this episode and looking at Israel from outside of Israel, whether or not they're thinking to make Aliyah or they're just, feel really connected to this country and everything that's going on, from all the experiences you've had, what you're doing right now, what's something that you would want to share with them?
Interesting. That's a good question.
It's a hard question.
Yeah.
So it's okay if it takes
maybe
a
some
minute.
scoop wise.
I think
what will be
Yeah.
post
maybe,
the next 2
what's
months.
the future.
With the new Trump administration coming in.
Yeah, those are the big
post-war. Hopefully, there's a deal coming up.
Yeah, so you are actually pointing at the right questions that we are asking. I certainly can't predict what will happen, but I think there's a sense that we are living through historic times, that our kids, our grandkids, maybe generations, thousands of years beyond, are going to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's, we're here for the tragedy of October 7th and the scars that reopened about Jewish people can be slaughtered again and in Israel, and kind of shaking our sense of security and what how firm this country is. But I think we've seen, especially in recent months, the power that Israel has, especially compared to some of our enemies. You see the successes we've had at a painful cost, but in Lebanon, watching the Assad regime fall, certainly Iran feels very, on its back foot. And then you see this new energy because, there's a president coming in who was the one who was behind the Abraham Accords, and there might be more potential there as well. I think we're living through historic times, and there's certainly complex challenges within the country. But being here now is, we're living and we're contributing to some of the biggest moments in Israel's history and in Jewish history in a long time. So I think that is something that's important to recognize. But I will also say that the Jewish community around the world, and even, or maybe also especially non-Jewish supporters around the world, playing a huge role in this, right? They go through challenges that we don't go through in terms of anti-Semitism, neighbors, college campuses. But the fact that they're still out there demonstrating, writing, visiting, it's very inspiring. It's very important. It's definitely felt. So I think we're all in this together. And we might think that the world is against us, but I've found as I travel, we have so many friends in the world too. And I think we have to focus on them as well, because there's really people that care about Israel, that focus on Israel, and that want us to win, and that they're on our side in this.
Amazing.
Okay, Lazar, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Honor. Hashem has blessed you literally to be a messenger, I think. And you definitely have amazing missions that you've pulled off in life and still doing in different facets, from the army to other stuff overseas, which I'm sure we can't say right now. But thank you. It was such an honor. And I love your articles.
Thank you.
And keep on spreading.
And thank you for
thank you for caring for the Jewish people here. For the Olim here in Bak.
Thank you for doing it.
Yerushalayim.
Couldn't do it without you.
So thank you again. And it was really an honor. I want to wish you all the best, and Hashem should bless you to continue in everything that you're doing with a lot of success. Amen. And maybe one day you will be a top figure that will be like, wow.
I'll come back on the show.
Come back on the show. Don't ignore us. We won't have those press conferences connections. So thank you. All the best. JLM Unplugged. Goodbye.